Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Zach, and we got a great show today, where we're going to discuss a little bit more about Magellan and his trip around the world. However, I can't explore the world alone, so as always, I brought in Rafe. Rafe, how we doing today?
Hey, Zach, I am fantastic. Another wonderful week has gone by and all sorts of exciting things have happened to me. It is great to be on the podcast again and to be chatting with you. Before we start, I just want to say thank you to all our listeners. Again, we've heard from a number of you guys this week, and we love to hear from you. Thanks for sending the emails out, and we take your requests and your suggestions to heart before we throw them in the trash. No, we do take them to heart, and we try to make sure we use your suggestions to make the podcast better for everybody. As always, you can contact us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com or legal@bufnagle.com or find us on Twitter or Instagram, those other places. Our podcast is available through Buzzsprout and also Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all sorts of other places. So if there's a platform you'd like us to be on, let us know and we'll figure out how to get it there. And if you're new to the podcast, well, welcome. Thanks for coming. We're glad you are here. We're going to ask you to give us a couple of episodes. Come on back for a weekly visit for a couple weeks in a row, and we'll be talking about all sorts of different things. Give us 4 episodes, and we'll give you reasons to come back for more. Remember, tell a friend to listen, and you will get a free episode.
Hi, that all sounds pretty great. I like free episodes. Free is good, but speaking of free, Magellan was not very free in St. Port Julian Andrews or wherever he was hanging out where we last left him.
Yeah, we left the Armada de Muculas. We left them at Port St Julian down there on the east coast of South America, wintering the winter or the mid months of 1520, and they had sent a ship out for reconnaissance. They got shipwrecked and they hiked their way back, and it was kind of a yucky winter there. There had been a mutiny, and things were not going well for the Armada when we left them, but they all had survived the shipwreck and they made it back to Port St Julian. Our friends in the Armada had they thought there were pretty much no natives in the area, but then they noticed one day there was this giant wandered out of the wood. Zach, this guy was 8 feet tall, and he wandered out, and he was like on shore, and he saw the ships, and he started like dancing around and doing things. And instead of like shooting him like they probably would have done months before, Magellan said, "I got an idea. Why don't you?" And he picked a guy. He said, "You go over there and you like dance like he's doing." And so they were like, "Hey, a new buddy." Okay. And this guy was like 8 feet tall. Yeah. So they made friends with this guy. And he was a member of the tribe called the Tehulcha, which was hard enough for me to say, but Magellan said I can't pronounce that. So he called them the Patagonia, which is the source of our word now, Patagonia. That's where they were. And this guy was really big, but he did in defense. He had this big hat on. He had really big boots, and but he was very, very tall. And there was a whole tribe of very, very big people, and they would cover themselves in white dirt. Then I got to know some of these guys. Sometimes things went well, and of course, sometimes things went wrong. There was a scuffle at one point. Magellan took some natives hostage on the ship. Some of the crew members died. Some of the natives died. So eventually, after getting through the winter there, 1520, the Armada left Port St Julian back on August 24th, which was, starting to be spring now in the southern hemisphere, and they actually kept some of those natives on the ship with him, including their really big tall guy, and they brought him along with them. They were like, "You want to go around the world?" I was like, "That sounds pretty cool to me." And remember, they had 2 co-conspirators from the mutiny. They left them on the island there at Port St Julian with some bread and some wine and said, good luck. That's what
Survive, good luck, have fun, don't get scurvy.
Don't get, yeah, that's what they told them. And it was, at this point, they were 11 months into the journey and they had still not left the Atlantic. To me, that's, all right, you thought, yeah, this is a long thing to go around the world in 15.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's also the time they spent hanging out at St. Port Julia Michaels Andrews, whatever I'm calling it now.
Yeah, they did spend a long time there, and to me, it was interesting that they stopped when they did. But I think they found what they.
I think they were trying to be overly cautious, understanding that we don't really know where we're going. More in a precarious situation. Let's hold up a little bit, as opposed to this like full steam ahead. Let's lose 7 ships, even though we brought 5 and
right.
not make it back.
Yeah, well, and that's part of it, right? So they're going farther. They're going into winterier weather as winter's approaching, and at some point you have to say we're done. Stop. So they stopped in April and they left in August, and they continued down the east coast of South America. And on October 18th, 1520, they found the start of the Strait. All right, and you may be wondering, I thought about this. If you ever gone the coast of an ocean, I mean, it's bays and little harbors, and you got to go in and out, all these things. The question was, how do you know if this thing's a strait? Right. So what they would do is they would take soundings. They would take like see how deep the water was, right, and then they would also take samples of the water very deep, right, and they would like if the thing that looks like a strait is actually a bay, then as you go into it, the water is going to get less salinic. Right. And as you come back out, it's going to be right. But if the water coming through is just as salinic as what you're in, then not as salinic as urine, it's salinic as the water you're in. All right. Then, yeah, there's the pun for you. All right. Then you're still in the ocean. All right. So they found salt water. They found very strong currents. All right. And they continued into this thing. They were 52 degrees south, which is akin to being in that lower lobe of Hudson Bay. Right. So those North Americans listening to us, Hudson Bay is this big bay up in Canada, and there's a lower lobe of it. And they were essentially that far. They were that far south.
South, equivalently north.
Right. So they start going into this strait, and the strait is 300 miles long. Right. And it's not like strait is a strait, Strait. It's not the strait with the GH in it, which would mean that it was like straight. And this was a strait, which means it was a passageway, but it was not straight. It was not a straight.
It was not very straight.
No, not at all. Not at all. If and the only thing I can equate it to was when I've been to Seattle and I've been in Puget Sound. And if you go, you look around and this big body of water, it's ocean water. So you're in the ocean, but how do you, like, if you dropped me there at Seattle, I don't know how to get out. I don't know how to get to the Pacific, right? I mean, I know you kind of go northy, but there's islands and there's bays and there's little straits up there. And it's, how do you get to the Strait of Juan de Fuca? Is that who that guy is up there? How do you get out, right? And that's what they were facing when they're trying to get across from the Atlantic Pacific. And not only that, they're very far south there, and there's a lot of storms and stuff down there. There were these storms called willy-was, which is a fun word to say, but they came out of nowhere. These storms would come up, and they were like massive thunderstorms, and they would thunder and lightning, and very, very frightening, right? And so that it was a bad place to be. And so here they are. They're going through the strait, and they're trying to find their way through, and they got 4 ships. And it's nasty.
Yeah, this is a very treacherous journey, but they're also doing it so that they don't have to, 1, go all the way around South America, and 2, go all the way around Africa, around the Strait of Certain Death.
Yeah, right.
So they're deciding to go through the Strait of who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, so you're right. There's just choices. You can go around the Cape of It Takes Forever, which is at the base of South America, the Strait of we don't know what's going to happen, or the Cape of Certain Death. So you pick, right? So they're doing the straight one, right? So they're cutting through. All right. And you got to imagine like what they do is like, okay, so why don't you go that way around that island, see what you find. You go that way around that one, see what you find. And we'll meet back here in 3 days? I mean, that's the kind of thing they did. All right. They did have the advantage of very long days because now it's getting to be close to the December solstice. And you're getting very, very long days and very short nights. So they're getting that way. They're down to like 3 hours of night. So they're getting a lot of time to explore, which is kind of good. All right. So on October 28th, the Magellan sends Concepcion and San Antonio off in different directions. They were like, okay, you go around that way, you go around the other way, and we'll come back here in 4 days. Okay. Well, 4 days roll around and Concepcion shows up and San Antonio doesn't. And they're like, well, maybe that was that storm we had a day and a half ago, and they were like 10 miles over there and they got wrecked. Or maybe, what do you do now? You're Magellan, so you're missing a ship. So he hangs there for a while.
You're already missing one ship from the one that crashed earlier that caused all types of problems. So you're down to 3 ships now.
You're down to 3 ships. So they go, and the 3 ships now go looking around. Like, what do? Go looking around for that. He even sent a guy, he said, climb to the top of that hill and look and see if you can see him. All right. And of course, he spends all day climbing up to the top, looks around, doesn't see anything, comes back down. All right. And it turns out that the guys from San Antonio had quit. They were like, we're done. Right. And they mutinied and they left and they went back to Spain. Right. So they went their way back out of the Strait, back up the east coast of South America. Maybe they picked up the guys that they left. They went back to Spain. Okay. So Magellan finally says, well, can't find them. They're either lost. I got to go on. Okay. So he decides to go on now with 3 ships. Okay. And on November 28th, 38 days after he goes into the Strait, he comes out the other side in the Pacific. Okay. So it's 38 days to get through there, 300 miles. That's less than 10 miles a day. Right. Which is insane amount of exploring he has to do. And getting through the Strait is so complicated that no Europeans made it through the Strait again until Drake did it 60 years later. Yep. 60 years later. Okay. So now they're in the Pacific. Well, what? All problems solved, right? Because it is Pacific Ocean, right? I mean, it's like smooth and calm and it's
sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah, it's all sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns will pull your boat across the Pacific. So they have 3 ships, fewer than 200 men, and they sail northwest and then kind of west, and then hunger and scurvy get to be a problem. Now, most of this information I'm reading, I never mentioned this before. I get a lot of this information from this book, Over the Edge of the World by Lawrence Bergreen. And this came out within the last years. And it's a pretty good summary of and it's very well written in that it's an easy read, little quick sections about what's happening. I have one little question about it, and that's his insistence that the sailors might have been worried about sailing over the edge of the world. It's not obvious to me when he writes it if he really believed that or if he was speaking metaphorically about the world. But we know now that sailors...
We've proven multiple times already on this podcast that no one ever thought the Earth was flat. So
right. So I think he's speaking metaphorically in here. But he writes this way. Okay, so and most of this information comes from the chronicler that Magellan had named Pigafetta. He's an Italian guy. All right, and he says in the book, Bergreen says, thirst and hunger tormented the crew. The seals they had butchered and salted in Patagonia had turned putrid and became infested with maggots, which devoured the sails, rigging, and even the sailors' clothes, rendering all of them useless. Pigafetta chronicled the appalling deterioration in their food supply. He said, quote, we were 3 months and 20 days without getting any kind of fresh food. We ate biscuit, which was no longer biscuit, but powder of biscuit, swarming with worms, for they had eaten the good. It stank strongly of the urine of rats. We drank yellow water that had been putrid for many days. We also ate some ox hides that had covered the top of the main yard to prevent the yard from chafing the shrouds, and which had become exceedingly hard because of the sun, rain, and wind. We left them, the ox hides, in the sea for 4 or 5 days, and then placed them for a few moments on top of the embers, and so ate them. And often we ate sawdust from boards. Rats were sold for 1/2 a ducato apiece, and even then we could not I mean, so yeah, quarantine from COVID, bad. All right. This is 3 months and 20 days on these ships in the middle of freaking nowhere on the Pacific Ocean. There's no fresh water. There's no food unless a flying fish happens to land on the deck. All your meat has gone terrible. Your hardtack has now become powder. You're eating ox hides that you soak in the ocean to soften them up, and then you fry them. All right. And yeah, okay. Quarantine ain't all that bad, folks. I mean, this was a terrible, terrible, terrible.
Yeah, and you're in the Pacific Ocean, specifically the eastern side, closer to the Americas and South and North America, where there's very little archipelagos for you to island hop around.
Yeah, so they did hit a couple islands, and they were deserted, right?
Yeah.
So like, have you ever been to, like, they didn't find Easter Island, but like that's an example of the kind of island they found, just this little nothing out there. So, and not only that, scurvy's a problem, okay? Because they're not getting any vitamin C. And scurvy, this is in the book too, scurvy, because you don't get vitamin C, you can't produce collagen, which holds your body together. So your teeth start falling out. Wounds that you had that were stitched up by scar tissue when you were a little kid, they start opening up. I mean, these guys just died these tremendously terrible, just terrible, terrible deaths. Pigafetta said they lost 29 sailors over the course of that essentially 100 days from leaving the Strait to getting to where they finally get, Zach, they get to Guam.
Yes.
Okay. 7,000 miles without interruption. Every day, get up, sail west. Every day, get up, sail west. Eat some oxhide, catch a rat. I mean, what do you...
repeat.
Yeah.
Don't die.
Lather, rinse, repeat, bury your friends in the sea, right? It was terrible. It was terrible stuff. They get to Guam. And of course, like any place that they get there, some people speak the language, somebody doesn't. Magellan had this servant that originally had come from the Philippines. All right. And he's actually the first guy to circumnavigate because he had come from the Philippines as a boy to Spain. All right. And then he had gotten on Magellan's ship. And so he was actually the first one around. Right. So there's a thing. Okay.
But he didn't do it in the same trip.
Right. But he had done it over the course of his lifetime. So, they had some good and some bad in Guam, some good exchanges with certain people. And there were some shenanigans and there were some casualties. Okay. They leave. Okay. That was on March 6th. On March 9th, they leave Guam, and 9 days later, they arrive in Suluan. Right. Only 9 days, Zach. Just like 9 days of sailing at this point is nothing.
That's like an easy nap.
Yeah. It's like, well, we're there already. All right. So in April, they get to the Philippines. Right. And they land on the island of Cebu. Right. So one of the Philippine islands. All right. And by this time, Magellan had learned how to make friends, and there's lots of banquets and feasts and trading and
celebration.
Yeah, stuff with the natives. All right. And they got lots of people baptized. And this is where it starts getting a little wonky. Okay. So on April 26th, okay, they've been there 19 days in the island. It's like, I don't know why they're not like, just at this time, I'd be like, I don't care. We're just point me to the Spice Islands, please. Just point me there. Right. But they're talking to the Philippine natives, and he talks to this one guy, this Chief Sula, who is on the island of Mactan, and he says, Magellan, I need you to come here because there's this other chief also on the island named Lepu Lepu. All right, and Sula says, I've converted Christianity, but what I need is we need Lupa. He's not going to convert. He's being standoffish. We need him to convert so that we don't have this
united front.
Yeah. So we're all together. And Magellan says, sure, that's no problem. I can come talk to him. And Sula says, no. I need you to come and kick his ass. All right. That's what I need you to do. And so Magellan says, yeah, I can do that. And Sula says, well, we can help you out. He goes, no, that's all right. I will show you how the Spanish lions fight, what he says. All right. And famous last words, just like, what's the lesson we learned from Princess Bride, Zach?
The first is to never get involved in a land war in Asia.
But that's pretty much it, right?
And then the slightly lesser known is never go in against the Sicilian when death is on the line.
On the line, that's right. All right. But this was the land war in Asia, right? And he's getting involved in this little tribe. And so The next day, April 27th, before dawn, Magellan gets his men, the 49 guys in a ship, and they sail over to Mactan 3 hours before dawn. And they get out of their big ship into little boats and they row in pretty close. But because the tide was low, they have to jump out of the ships and walk their way to shore. Okay, so they jump out of the boat and they have to, it's like half a mile through the water. And they're like, yo, here we come. And there's 49 of these Spanish lions getting ready to kick the butts of the natives. And these 49 Europeans were met by 1,500 warriors under Lepu. All right, it was a rout. It wasn't even close. Magellan and his men were outmanned 30-1. Right, and the ones that survived just did it because they retreated. Magellan gets hacked apart in the surf, and his body, his armor, none of him is ever recovered. And Lapu-Lapu is considered to this day a Philippine national hero. And that's it. That's Magellan.
Magellan is done, and nothing ever happens again.
Right.
That's the story of Magellan. That's the story.
Yeah. So like, wow, what? There you go. So now these guys are stuck there. There's no captain. They're down to 3 ships. They're stuck in the Philippines. They still don't have any cloves or spices.
Food.
What was that?
Or food.
Well, the food, they're getting better with the food, right? Because they're staying near their people. There was civilization. It was native civilization, but it was there, and they had their stuff. All right. So this was April 27th. Magellan's dead. He's gone. Okay. And by the 30th, by May 1st, they were back in the Philippines talking they had some little parties and stuff. But at that point, the natives have turned on these guys and they ambush the what's left of the Armada. All right. And 20 of these guys get killed or imprisoned and sold to the Chinese. So the rest of them retreat to the ships and they sail out of there. Okay. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet, on May 6th, the San Antonio, remember them? They bailed out in the Strait. They make it back to Seville. And they're like, hey, we're back. And they were like, where are the other ships? He was like, well, Magellan was being a jerk and he was putting everybody's life in peril. So we left and we're awesome and he sucks. They're probably lost. We're heroes. And they were like, okay, sounds good to us. All right. So they had an investigation with all the people who came back. And of course they had 6 months to get their stories straight and get all their things lined up. And they came out smelling like a rose. Meanwhile, on the other side of the planet in the Philippines, you got the Concepcion, Trinidad, and Victoria. They get out of there. Concepcion is that ship is now full of worms and dying. So they're like, screw that. They take all the stuff off Concepcion and put on the other 2 ships and they burn Concepcion and they sail away, right? On May 2nd. All right. And they spend, this is early May. They spend the rest of the summer and autumn working their way to the Spice Islands. Now, if you go to your little Google map machine and you type in Spice Islands, you'll see these tiny, tiny, tiny little islands. There's 4 of them, north to south. They are Ternate, Tidor, Motir, and Magellan, 4 very small islands in Indonesia, each of them less than 6 miles across. And they are southwest of the Philippines. They're west of Papua New Guinea and east of Sulawesi. Okay. Now I had to look all this up. You got to be a really good geographer to know where these things are. But they finally make it to the Spice Islands and they are really pumped. They do some bartering. They do some trading. There's all sorts of political intrigue because the Arab traders are already there. The Chinese are there. Everybody's trading all sorts of stuff. And here come the Spanish and they were like, we want a part of that. And of course the natives are like, cool, we'll side with you. You guys look like you're pretty tough. You could keep the bad guys away. So everybody wants a cut of the action and the Spanish are now in part of it, right? This is early November 8th. By mid-December, the ships are stuffed to the brim with cloves. And they're like, okay, we're going to leave now. Thank you very much. And they have this big ceremony and they shoot off the cannons and they raise the flags and, the natives come out and do little dances. And everybody's really excited and they cut the moorings and Victoria starts and Trinidad starts sailing. Trinidad pretty much takes up her ropes, starts sailing and starts taking on water like that. All right. So she's leaking, right? Because Magellan wasn't around. So nobody was being a tough guy with, hey, we got to do maintenance on the ship. Right. So Trinidad takes on water and finally they're like, oh, screw this. So they take what they can out of Trinidad and put it on Victoria. Remember, they're down to 2 ships. All right. They put it on Victoria. They stuff her full of stuff. 53 men have to stay back behind with Trinidad. They're like, well, we'll take the other cloves and we'll put them in this warehouse and we'll come back and get them later because it only took us 2 years to get here, right? So they're going to repair.
Only 2 years.
Holy cow! I just can't believe this. So they work on Trinidad. They're going to get her repaired. Juan Sebastian Elcano was elected to command Victoria, right? They're doing all this stuff. And meanwhile, don't forget, the Portuguese are still on the hunt for these, right? Because they're Portuguese own the Spice Island from the Treaty Tordesillas from 1494, right? So Victoria leaves the other guys behind, right? So they're all split up now, right? And she gets some damage in January and spends some time getting fixed up, and then starts making her way across the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, Trinidad undergoes repairs in the Spice Islands. All right. On April 6th, okay, so this happened in December. So it's like almost 6 months later, she's ready to go. And they put 50 tons of cloves on Trinidad. Right? 50 tons of cloves. Now, I did the math at my store here. Okay, cloves are selling for about $16 a pound in dried form. Okay. Remember, Victoria's got cloves as well, but they had a lot of cloves, Zach. All right. It was 50 tons of cloves. 50 tons times 2,000 pounds per ton times $16 a pound. They had like $11 million worth of cloves at current prices. All right. And cloves now are pretty cheap. All right. They had so much value on those ships. It's unbelievable. It was like gold. It was like having gold on these ships. All right. So Trinidad is the ship that got left behind. All right. These guys start sailing. Okay. There were enough cloves on Trinidad to finance the entire voyage. Yep. All 260 men, all the insurance, all the ships, all the food they didn't get to eat. The whole thing was financeable from what they had only on Trinidad, but they also had Victoria. Okay. So they elect this guy named Espinosa to run Trinidad. All right. And he had been very good for Magellan, but he sucked as a, okay. So they have to leave 4 guys behind at the trading post because they couldn't get all the spices. So the 4 guys hang behind. Okay. So the 4 Spanish guys are hanging behind. And then the Portuguese, they find out the Portuguese are coming. All right. Because they know that they're there. All right. So Espinosa, who's on the Trinidad, he sucks as a captain. So he sails east and then he goes north and he loses. Whenever they stop to get provisions, people bail out. They're like, I'm out. I'm hanging with the natives, or I'm out. I'm going to go to China, or whatever they do. They just leave.
Then you suck. Bye.
Something like that. Yeah. It's really bad. So eventually he sails he believed that North America was connected to Asia. So his idea was kind of sail up the east coast of Asia and then across underneath and then down the west coast of America. That was his plan. All right. He was terrible. He got as far as 42 degrees north. All right. And he was like, yeah, this isn't working well. Let's turn around. All right. Then he turns around and goes back down to the Philippines. They spent 7 months at sea without taking on provision. All right. Everybody's dying. Everybody's scurvying. People are bailing out whenever they get a chance. They arrive back at the Philippines, and you know what? They're the Portuguese are ready to kick their butts. All right. So they imprison everybody from the Trinidad because they're all being illegal. All right. They take all the stuff off of the Trinidad, right? All the equipment, the yard arms and telescope, all that kind of stuff. They take that. All right. And all the logbooks, which confirm that these guys were doing illegal things. All right. And then a storm comes in and destroys the ship, including the 50 tons of cloves, sink to the bottom of the harbor.
The $11 million, if not more.
It just lost.
Just vanishes.
Right. And Trinidad becomes just scrap. Okay. And then they make the guys who are remaining, they make them build a Portuguese fort out of the remnants of Trinidad. I mean, what an insult. Okay. And then they have to work there in the jungle, and eventually they all die. All right. Victoria is the only one left now. Elcano is trying to get himself around the Cape of Good Hope, and he battles that for weeks trying to get around the Cape of Good Hope. And finally, in May of 1522, he gets by and goes north. Okay. They're going up through May and into June. On June, they cross the equator, the 4th time they've crossed the equator when they've gone around it. Okay. They reach the Cape Verde Islands. We talked about those before on July 8th. as the closer they get to Europe, they realize, the Portuguese might be here waiting for us. Okay. They stop at the Cape Verde Islands and they're like, all right, well, it's Wednesday here. The port should be open. They were like, no, it's Thursday here. It's Wednesday to you, but it's Thursday to them because there was no international date line to cross. Okay. So right now there's a thing that had they crossed somewhere in the middle of the Pacific where the international date line is now, they would have turned their clock ahead one but that didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
All right. And these guys were really freaked out. They were like, we have no idea what we did on what day. And they were really worried that they ate meat on Good Friday. That was a big concern from them, that they celebrated these feasts on the wrong days. So on July 15th, when they're still there, they find out that the Portuguese are looking for them, and they're like, we need to get out of here. But some of their guys had gone on into the port to try to get supplies. They just leave them behind. They're like, we're out. They just bail out. Okay. And they leave. Victoria leaves with 22 men, 18 Europeans, and 4 of the natives that they have picked up along the way. All right. And these guys make it back to Spain on September 6th, 1522, just a couple days short of 3 full years since they started. Okay. And they have spices on the Victoria. They come into port. They're tied up at the dock, and they're like, we're out. We're
done. Take it. I don't care.
And they have this plaque. There's a plaque now. If you go to Sanlúcar de Barrameda in Spain, and you can get the list of these 18 guys. Of course, the 18 Europeans. We don't know the names of the native guys because they didn't write them down, because that's what they did back then, right? And Magellan's name, of course, is not on the plaque, but Magellan's name is on the Strait, and Magellan's name is on a mutual fund, and Magellan's name is on a GPS company, and Magellan is also named on 2 irregular dwarf galaxies that are visible in the southern hemisphere. Magellanic clouds. All right. So Magellan got his due with getting cool stuff named for him. The trip was both a tremendous success
and a failure.
And a brutal failure. All right. They got a lot of money out of the cloves that they did get back from Victoria. But people realized that, even though you can go that way, we ain't going that way. And it was another 60 years before anybody went through the Strait.
Well, successfully made it through the Strait.
Right. And I'm sure some other people did here and there, but it is a fascinating read, Zach. Over the Edge of the World by Lawrence Bergreen. There's stuff in here. Let's just say this is not rated G, this book. So if you're going to give this to your 12-year-old, you might want to read it ahead. This is an interesting story. And this book was published in 1520. Oh no, that's the wrong one. This was wow, this had a lot of printings. This is 2003, so it's about 20 years old now. But it's from my perspective, knowing what I know, it's a fairly straightforward, stick to the facts kind of thing.
Adventure story.
But it's the adventures, like what these guys went through, Zach. It's astounding that anybody would sign up for that. And you look today, it was like, I'm not sure I want to go all the way to the mall to order Amazon. It was like, no, I'll go around the world, buy spices there in the Spice Islands. It was incredible. Yeah,
they did some fascinating things, and like you said, Magellan, he might not have made it all the way around, but like what he did or want to accomplish, like has trickled down and has its fundamental that's still in society that we see today. It's quite fascinating, the fact that in the 1500s these guys are like, let's go, let's see what happens. Let's explore beyond what we know. Like there's so much of this creative energy, and we can talk about this in a further episode, in these times that we refer to as the Dark Ages, when instead they were people doing interesting and enlightening things that weren't necessarily the invention of gravity or doing derivative or some fancy math thing that came out of Isaac Newton's brain or anything of the like. It was these guys were going out on adventures. They were exploring. They were setting the bar for human endeavors higher and higher.
Yeah, and you look at, so they went to these islands in the Pacific, and if you look at them like on the map, you can see lots of little islands there, and you can imagine island hopping until you zoom in and you realize those islands are 80 miles or something. So these guys got, like the natives, thousands of years ago, got in these little boats and they paddled, or they took right, and they went to this island. They were like, well, we'll set up camp here. We'll live here for hundreds of years by ourselves. But the world it's really interesting because, and I think we will talk about this when we talk. We have one coming up about the Dark Ages not being as dark as they are. Right?
We have just so everyone's aware, we have the Dark Ages not being very dark, and we have Marco Polo and adventures into the Orient as well. So those are two on the horizon.
Yeah, there was a lot of global travel. I guess that's the way to put it. There was a lot of motion of people. People took the time and effort to walk, all right, or to paddle. I don't think many of them swam, but that's like they would paddle, they would walk, they would ride a horse, and they got around. Now Marco Polo went to the Orient, but lots of people went. The Italians traded a lot with people in the East. Marco Polo wrote it down. Right. And we get to keep the things that that get written down. So here's the thing, kids, if you're listening, write down your adventures, write them down, record them somehow so that they are there for posterity. So 500 years from now, when Lawrence Bergreen's great grandchild writes the story of your great adventures, there's somebody like there's a Pigafetta there writing down the adventure for you. So when was Marco Polo? Was that late 1200s, Zach? Am I remembering that right?
He was 1200s.
So late
Silk Road. He really popularized the Silk Road and the travel, the east for Europeans, the Eastern path to Asia.
Yeah, and that was but that wasn't, he wasn't the first to do it, right? I mean, that was a very common thing to have happen. And
he was the first one to record doing it and to kind of connect the civilizations in a new way, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, so money makes the world go round, and global trade has been out there as long as people have realized that there is a globe, and so that's where we are. But the Magellan story is phenomenal. Zach, someday we will take a cruise. I keep bothering your mother. I say let's go on a cruise, and she was like, yeah, let's go on a cruise. I was like, I want to go through the Strait of Magellan. She was like, that sounds cool. And so I don't know if
also it sounds like a not fun trip to go through those waters there
with the Willowas. I want to go. It's very interesting to me. There's a discussion in the book about the natives that lived there and essentially at the edge of the world, right? I mean, if you understand the current thinking about the peopling of the America and crossing from Asia and then down the west coast, probably the west coast of the Americas, and then out down across the Isthmus of Panama into South America. You have a population of people that are living down there at Patagonia and Tierra del Fuego, which is like the edge of the world. And this is a very interesting evolutionary thing, is that these people got pushed and pushed and pushed. Right. So some people fought back and established empires. Some people fought back and got killed. If you just keep moving, eventually that's where you end up, is stuck at the end. And there's some very interesting pictures if you look at these tribes that are down there. And I did a lot of digging around in the images on the Google machine. It is stunning. Darwin went down there too, and it is amazing to see the pictures of the natives and how they look, how similar they are genetically. There's very little variation. And I think a lot of that has to do with that's a very narrow, tight environmental structure to live in.
Yeah, I mean, and going off that further, the Spanish and the Portuguese, when they went to colonize South America, they realized that these civilizations created different ways to live as well. They were up in the mountains at high elevation, at where things didn't grow naturally like they would at farms in Europe. So they created new ways to do that. And to the Europeans, it was this new way of life that they've never thought about before. And so for the most part, they kind of left them alone, and they were just like, yeah, we're here to help if you want us, but we're just going to hang out. So it's an extremely interesting understanding about how all that comes together.
There's two kinds of those, though, right? I mean, there was like when Cortez comes over and he starts dealing with the Aztecs, he had a lot of support. All right, Cortez had a lot of support from the other natives around there, because the Aztecs would go out and slaughter everyone. take your children, take your women, slaughter them as a festival. So when Cortez says, "Hey, I'm thinking of taking down this guy in Mexico City," they were like, "We're in, we're in, we're in." All right. So there was, it was interesting. I don't think the Europeans really left everyone alone. They really wanted the gold. All right. That was a good thing. But it was a very interesting merging of culture took place.
You mentioned, I will have to mention next, you mentioned the gold, which leads us to the lost city of El Dorado and the city of gold, which was the reason that some European adventurers decided to go to South America. The city has never been found, but, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. That's an adventure in the story we can tell another time. But I'm a fan that it did exist along with the lost city of Atlantis, but those are stories for another time. Rafe, you have any house cleaning things for us to wrap up today?
No, I think we're all good, Zach. We want to encourage you again to let us know you're out there and let us know how we can answer your questions. We got a number of them from some of our listeners who are part of military operations, and we appreciate the opportunity to come to you and chat with you, and we appreciate the work you're doing for us, and hopefully we can pay that answer, getting your questions answered. Look for your answers in a couple of weeks. And
like Rafe said, if you have anything you want us to talk about, or it's like, hey, this is a topic I would like to hear you guys discuss, shoot us a message and we'll get working on it. We do a lot of behind the scenes production stuff so that these episodes sound as good as possible. So with that said, thank you all for listening. Go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good. Enjoy the adventure of life.